Hello again. Today we are going to talk about some specific strategies and tips to help you have effective communication when you run into those difficult interactions that you most honestly will run into. And in your book, you have a whole chapter that is dedicated to difficult interactions. And I'm just taking some general information and then some specific ideas for you. We all know that communication is so vital. It's a huge component of any human relationship you have, whether personally or professionally. In the professional realm, communication is the foundation of cooperation and collaboration among educators. Let's think about technology and how it's changed the way that we now communicate. Look at these items. Do you follow any of these? Do you email the person in the office or classroom next door? Do you have a list of 15 phone numbers to reach your family? Do you ever pull up in the driveway and use your cell phone to see if anyone is home? Help carry in the groceries? Do you get up in the morning and go online checking your email? Or sometimes do you lay in bed and check your email, either with your BlackBerry, maybe your iPod Touch, maybe you're texting on your telephone or tweeting? Do you ever do that even in bed before you get up? Do you ever not stay in touch with friends because you don't have their email addresses? Have you stopped writing letters? Do you send cards to people? Because even when there's condolences to be sent, they can be done electronically. It's just amazing how technology has really changed the way we communicate. Here are some nonverbal modes of communication. Look these over. I think they're pretty self-explanatory, aren't they? You have to be very, very careful with each one of these items, or you may send the wrong message. If you have a low level of energy when you're talking with someone, it might be misinterpreted that you're not interested. For example, if you're having a parent conference and you really don't act like you're very interested, but maybe you just had kind of a tough day and you're tired, the parent may take that the wrong way. Do you look at the clock or your watch when you're having a conversation with someone? That really is one that irritates me when it happens. Or eye contact. When someone will lose eye contact with me and look at something else or over my head at somebody else to see who's talking to whom, then I think they really don't value that conversation with me. The rate of your voice, how you have your feet and your legs, your arms when you're sitting. All of these things are nonverbal ways that you can communicate well and you can communicate not so well. Do we have ethnic and gender differences in communication? You have to be very careful that you're attuned to the ethnic, racial, linguistic, and cultural differences in people, because people from all these different backgrounds may react differently to situations, and you have to be very careful how you communicate with them. The age-old question, are men from Mars and women from Venus? Do we tend to communicate differently? Look at these items that are listed here. This is typically when I like to tell my sweater story as an example of how men and women don't communicate in the same manner. Several Christmases ago, I had given my husband a list of things that I wanted for Christmas because he always struggles with what to get me. One of them was a Christmas sweater, and that's what it said on the list. And that's what I told him. I said, honey, they have these really nice sweaters over at J.C. Penney. They're Christmas sweaters. I would love to have one. Well, he pretty much left the house, went over, came back, and I saw he had a J.C. Penney bag. So I thought, oh, great, he got me a Christmas sweater. I'm going to wear it Christmas Day. Open it up Christmas morning. My level of expectation, of course, was there's going to be a beautiful Christmas sweater in there. And I opened up the box, and it was an ugly navy blue cardigan. I looked at my husband and I said, honey, this is really nice, but what I really wanted was a Christmas sweater. I was so disappointed and I was trying not to show that disappointment to him because he had really tried. So I said, I just really thought you were going to get me a Christmas sweater. And the color drained from his face and he said, that's not what you told me. You said you wanted a sweater for Christmas. So do you see how I obviously did not communicate effectively with my husband? And men and women do communicate very differently. How does that impact you professionally or with families? It impacts you in huge ways because if you're a male and you have a female administrator, that could be an issue because the way you communicate, and I'd have to say most guys just like the basic facts, whereas women like all the details. Or if you're a female instructor and you have a male administrator, that could be an issue. How you communicate with dads versus how you communicate with mothers is very different. So keep those things in mind. If you're in a co-teaching situation, oh my, that could really affect how you work with the other person. Or if you're a male and you are in an elementary building, you may be surrounded by a lot of females. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I think you have to take that into account that women are going to want a whole lot more detail than perhaps you really want to give them. And when we communicate with other people, we have to really try and give them what they need in order to feel comfortable. So take these things all into mind as we talk about communication. And you can see why we end up with difficult interactions sometimes. Again, here we're talking about computer-mediated communication. Be very, very careful that you aren't the person constantly sending emails instead of writing letters, phoning, or meeting face to face. Some people use email to avoid interacting with people, and they hope that if they email, that they can just dust that off their plate and say, I'm done, I emailed them, and they never emailed me back. Well, that isn't going to fly, especially in the field of special education. When a parent can turn around and file a due process with you if they don't feel you've been trying to communicate effectively with them, that isn't going to fly with a hearing officer by saying, I just emailed them. They're going to ask you if you varied your types of communication. That's really what the Office of Exceptional Children feel the spirit of the law is. So make sure you just aren't always using email to contact parents. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call them. Are you a person on the left where it says you send off several emails a day and rarely stop to think about how those messages are being received and interpreted? Because like it says at the bottom, there's no tone or voice in your email, and other nonverbal elements can easily result in miscommunication and therefore a difficult interaction with another person. I had once sent off an email to a teacher when I was a director of pupil personnel asking her to do something, and I was having a day where I did not have time to go out and talk to her face to face, and deep down inside I knew that was probably the better way to communicate with her, but it had to be done that day, and I physically couldn't get to her building that day with my schedule. So I shot her off a quick email, being very direct, very blunt about what I wanted her to do. And when I saw her next, I said, oh, did you get my email? She said, yes, I did. And I cried for 2 hours afterwards. I was mortified. I said, oh my goodness, I really didn't mean to come across that way. But that's exactly how I came across. So it wasn't my intent, and then I caused this poor person some misery. And I'm a pretty nice person, so I felt horrible that I had done this to this other educator. So remember that email can greatly facilitate or because it can be very efficient. It can be very efficient, or it can hinder ongoing collaborative efforts. And email is a great way to work with families if that is how they want to be communicated with. That's something I always appreciated, but some parents want you to pick up the phone and call them. So you need to find out what's the best way that you would like to communicate with me, and here's the best way I'd like you to communicate, vice versa. If you notice with this course, I didn't hand out a whole lot of telephones to reach me because I'm not always sitting right by my cell phone. I will admit I don't use my cell phone very much except for family and perhaps some emergencies. I really communicate better via email. So I always tell people I'm always on my computer. If you need me, the best way to reach me is email because I check it throughout the day and I'll get back to you within 24 hours unless I'm out of town and I don't have internet access. And I like to Skype. And sometimes you will find out the mode of communication that works best for a person. For example, I work with someone who is not so good at returning emails, but she Skypes all the time. So when I see, and it wasn't the person that just came up on the screen there, that was somebody else. But I find that if I Skype when I see them online, I get my answers much quicker. That's their personal preference of communication and it works. So you need to find that out about the folks that you work with. Again, netiquette rules. Can you believe we have to have netiquette rules now? Especially when you're working with families. Remember, this is in print. And again, this can come back to haunt you if you don't do it carefully. Never send a parent an email unless you do a spell check. Make sure your grammar is correct. Be professional. Don't try to be funny. Just try to be professional unless you have a different type of relationship with the person. Your colleagues, it's up to you how you want to email them, but I'd be very careful. Make sure you have a signature block, especially for a parent, that gives them information on how to contact you. Never say anything in an email that you wouldn't want to say in a crowded room, or as I say, or see in the front page of the newspaper, or hear read in a due process hearing. Be very, very careful. Remember, email can be sent and forwarded to just about anybody. So never send anything that you wouldn't say to the person's face. Just be very, very careful about that. All right? Just a word of warning. Nonverbal communication. Again, we talked a little bit about this. And can you think of experiences where you've had one or more of these or where one or more of these has had a positive or negative impact on an interaction with a colleague or a parent? I can think of some, absolutely. Here are some skills that you need to have for communicating. I'm not going to go into each one of those. Here's some rapport building skills. Remember that people really do want to feel like you're really listening to them. They really, really want to feel that way. Okay, I'm not going to go through each one of those either. Here are some responsive listening skills. Think of nonverbal listening skills as if you're sitting at a tennis game and the ball is in the speaker's court. The listener just keeps sending the ball back by nodding or giving brief verbal encouragers like I see. How many people do you know that can't seem to do that? That they constantly have to jump in and say what they think, that they just can't sit back and listen. Very, very hard to do. They're almost waiting to respond to the person instead of really listening to them. And then verbal listening skills. Paraphrasing, when you do that, be as accurate and be as brief as possible. Remember, it's not always about you. And don't be afraid to postpone communication. If you're too tired or you're too upset, to listen responsively. If you're having a day and you are just not in the right frame of mind, it's okay to say, you know what? Let's postpone this. Let's get together tomorrow before school, or let's get together at lunch or after school or whatever, or let's get together by the end of the week and talk about this because I'm just not up to it right now. And I want to be able to give you my full attention. It's okay to say that. And it's okay to say that to a parent. You might want to say, you know what, today, unfortunately, I won't be able to discuss that today, but let's set an appointment up for tomorrow. And it would be better all the way around. And again, here's just a listening checklist. I would say under the avoidance of roadblocks, where it says no advice giving, if the person does ask for your advice, I think it's okay personally to give it to them. Don't ask them any inappropriate questions. Don't judge anyone. People can tell when you are judging and they can feel it. I think the rest are pretty self-explanatory. Now, assertiveness. How can I say this nicely? You want to be careful that you're not aggressive, but that you're assertive. And here it tells us that assertiveness skills allow you to achieve your goals, and here's the key part of this, without damaging the relationship or another person's self-esteem. Sometimes when you're aggressive, it does damage the relationship or the other person's self-esteem. It's okay to be assertive. And I would encourage you to be assertive, but don't be aggressive. Very, very big difference that will get you in hot water. Always use I instead of you, because you sounds, it's going to put them on the defensive. It sounds like you're accusing them of something. Always say and instead of but. State the behavior objectively. Name your own feelings. It's okay to say how you feel. Say what you want to happen. That's what's being assertive. And express concern for the other person and use assertive body language, the right nonverbals, along with your assertive statements. Here's how you can be concerned and assertive at the same time. As I just mentioned, if you use you sentences, that sounds accusing, even when you don't intend it to be, and it can lead others to be defensive. Now look at these two statements here. You should provide a place and a quiet time for Hannah to do her homework. If you were a parent, how would that make you feel? You would probably think, this teacher thinks I'm an idiot and I'm a bad parent and that I don't know how to help my child. Instead, if you said, I'm really frustrated when Hannah isn't getting her homework done. I'd like to work with you, and I would like to work with you to think of some ways to help her get it done. That's much more inviting, that's much more non-judgmental, and it's much more collaborative. And following up with that statement, it might be, tell me how you're currently, where Hannah likes to work in order to do her homework. When does she do it? Those types of things. But to just come right out and say, you know what, you need to do this is not a good way to get something done for the student. It is very hard to use and instead of but, isn't it? But it's extremely important in order to communicate effectively. Again, here's our checklist to be assertive. Some of these are repeated, but I think they're valuable. Again, don't be aggressive. Do not be aggressive. Then here are some roadblocks. And again, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record with these, but they're really important. The nonverbal roadblocks that we've talked about. The verbal roadblocks. Do you know people that judge? They avoid others' concerns. Terms, labels, and phrases that are roadblocks. Can you think of some of those? So those are some roadblocks. And then we have to really manage resistance, negativity, anger, and conflict. In problem solving, it is critical that you separate the person from the problem. Remember to always do that. Separate the person from the problem, because otherwise it gets personal and then it gets really ugly. It's estimated that as much as 80% of problem solving with others is getting through the resistance. Isn't that an interesting statistic? And resistance is often more about a reaction to change than a reaction to someone or even the idea itself. Very important to know that resistance is often more about reacting to change than what the actual idea is. How many people do you know that don't like change? That's what's causing your issue. Now, here are some examples that you might get from people who are really showing resistance. They may not say anything. They may just not participate on your team. And again, think of your staff meetings or your teams that you might be on, your committees. Not enough time to implement. They give up too soon. They get excited about something, but then they never get around to doing it. They're quick to say, that isn't going to work. Never worked, never will. They keep asking you for more and more details, and you're like, oh, good heavens, I've already done this. Or they'll give you a bunch of reasons why it won't work. These are some examples of what resistance can look like. And again, it may not be the actual idea that you're pitching, but that the person doesn't want to change, because that scares people. And it's easier and safer to keep doing the same things. How to deal with this again? Handle your own defensiveness first. Stop pushing. The other person can't push back if you stop pushing. Makes sense. Delay your reactions. Don't overreact. Keep quiet and listen to the other person. Remember that negative people, like Debbie Downers, and negative emotions are going to take all of your energy from you, and you don't need that. And your reactions can block communication and ruin potentially productive relationships. Negative people are not going to change. The person who has to change is you. Tough to do. And again, here are some other suggestions. Distance yourself from the action and reaction cycle. Just step back, take a deep breath, and more importantly, keep your eyes on the big picture, on the prize, what you're trying to get done. Keep your eye on that and what's going to be the best for the student. Now, here's why people get angry and how you need to deal with it. And I mean, as I read these are, it's so true in everybody's life. You start to feel angry when you perceive that something is unfair or threatening, and you feel helpless. That's when you really get angry. And when you have unresolved conflict, you have anger. You have to address the problem, not the person, and then try to find a common solution or a shared goal with the angry person. And when an angry person becomes loud and belligerent, speak more softly and calmly. You could actually have this happen in a parent conference. It doesn't happen so much with your colleagues. It could. Could it happen with an administrator? It might. But more often it might happen with a parent. And if that starts to happen, you just stop and speak more softly and calmly and try to diffuse the situation. Resolving school-related conflicts. And I'm going to be honest with you and keep it real. Some conflicts, especially when it comes to values, are difficult to prevent. And some are going to say, you're going to go, I just can't solve these at all. You have to try, and you have to pick your battles too. And I don't want to say the word battles in a negative connotation. I don't want to come across that way, but I think you know what I mean. First, you have to listen responsibly, acknowledge what's being said, and focus on interests rather than on positions. And Stephen Covey has a four-step, what he calls a win-win approach. Try to see the situation from the other person's perspective. Identify the key issues and concerns involved. Make a list of the results that you would consider acceptable and look for new options when you really get in those tough situations. And again, here's a final checklist for managing resistance and conflict. And I think this is pretty much a repeat of what we've talked about so far. And when communication goes wrong, a lot of it can be traced back to four different things. Telling others what to think or do, kind of being bossy, mistaking the person for the problem, blaming others, or having faulty working assumptions. It's very important that you communicate ethically with folks. It can be helpful if you get in a real sticky situation to write down what you might want to say and what the options might be. I'm not sure about the next one, keeping a log for recording selected interactions. I'm not sure about this. This would be an optional thing as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, when you're sending written communication, select your words carefully, and above all, remain calm and listen. And additional tips on handling conflict are treating the other person with respect, identifying the problem, describing it. Notice it's the problem. Focus on the issue. Confirm that you were heard and understood. Try to find out what the other person needs and check that understanding of that. State your own needs. It's okay to do that. Negotiate a solution and follow up on the solution. And again, if you don't get anything else out of this presentation, think about what's the priority. Is it the relationship or is it the issue? Sometimes you have to choose. And sometimes you get in situations where you have to let the issue go, if you can, because it's not as important as the relationship. You may be right and the other person may be wrong, but sometimes you have to let that go because the relationship is more important. That happens in our personal lives too. Sometimes you have to walk away from situations where you know you're right, but it's more valuable to you to keep that relationship with the person. Now, sometimes you're going to run into situations where the issue has to be more important than relationship. If something is going on that's hurting a student, if you see something in your building, or if you know a parent is perhaps abusing their child, you're going to have to let that relationship go with that person or that parent because the issue is much too critical. So again, you have to decide what's the priority, the relationship or the issue. That is a pretty tough thing to do. I'm going to stop here and give you a break, and I will come back with another presentation, and we're going to look at types of difficult people. You can see these all listed here, and we're going to go through each one, and I'm going to give you some specific tips on how to handle these difficult situations. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be back in just a minute.